Every MLB record you don't want to break, explained. The team that forgot how to win. You know things are bad when your season becomes a sad story over 120 years later. The 1899 Cleveland Spiders didn't just lose, they basically redefined what losing looked like. They won 20 games out of 154. That's it. 20. You'd have better odds finding a four-leaf clover in a sandstorm than catching the Spiders on a good day. Their winning percentage was a jaw-dropping .130. To put that in perspective, you could randomly pick names out of a hat for your lineup and probably still do better. And it wasn't just that they lost a lot, it's how they lost. They were getting blown out left, right, and center. And that's because their ownership literally gave away their best players to another team they also owned. What was left was a squad of baseball extras just waiting for the credits to roll. Other teams even refused to travel to Cleveland because it was a waste of time. So the Spiders had to play most of their season on the road. No home fans, no home field, just a non-stop tour of getting crushed city by city. Honestly, the 1899 Spiders weren't just bad, they were legendary bad. Modern-day disaster. The 2003 Detroit Tigers. If you thought tragic baseball seasons were only for black and white photos and turn-of-the-century facial hair, the 2003 Detroit Tigers will make you think twice. In a full 162-game season, they managed just 43 wins. That's 119 losses if you're counting, and you absolutely should. Because this wasn't just a rough year, it was a meltdown in HD. The Tigers somehow found new ways to lose. Blown leads, quiet bats, and questionable pitching. It was like a greatest hits album of how not to play baseball. Their team ERA was a mess, their defense was always asleep, and their offense? Well, let's just say no one was updating fantasy rosters with Tigers hitters. And this wasn't some rebuilding year with a clear direction. It was more like wandering into the woods without a map or shoes. But what really hurts is how close they came to matching the Spiders. Just 11 more losses, and they'd have tied the all-time record for futility. But hey, they didn't. Still, this was modern baseball's rock bottom, and for a whole generation of fans, this team taught us the true meaning of patience and despair. 50 games of pain, Louisville's epic meltdown. All right, let's talk about what happens when your season crashes before it even takes off. The 1897 Louisville Colonels came out of the gate and immediately tripped over their own cleats. They went 7-43 in their first 50 games. That's not just bad. Did someone curse this team bad? They basically lost 6 games for every one they won. It was so bad that fans could have gone grocery shopping during the games and missed absolutely nothing worth remembering. This kind of start doesn't just ruin your season, it breaks your spirit. By June, players were probably already planning off-season vacations, because there's nothing more demoralizing than showing up to the ballpark knowing your odds are worse than a coin toss. And here's the kicker, they weren't alone. The 1932 Red Sox and the 1897 Browns matched that horrid 7-43 mark. Like they wanted to make sure Louisville didn't suffer alone. It's one thing to have a losing streak. It's another to have 43 of them in 50 games. That's not baseball. That's slow torture disguised as a season opener. The A's tried their best, but it didn't help. The 2023 Oakland A's were like the human embodiment of a shrug emoji. They weren't expected to be great, sure, but what they delivered was an artistic level of losing. Through their first 50 games, they looked like they were on pace to rewrite history. A 32-130 finish was actually on the table. That would have been the second most losses ever, and they weren't even tanking. This was just baseball's version of a natural disaster. Watching the A's play felt like tuning into a show where you already knew the ending, and it wasn't good. The lineup was lifeless, the bullpen gave up leads like free samples, and the energy was somewhere between "please clap" and "we're sorry." The few fans who stuck around deserved medals for bravery, or at least discounted nachos, and while they didn't quite hit rock bottom, they gave it a solid effort. It was the kind of season where you start checking mock drafts in June. By July, fans were wearing paper bags on their heads and making sarcastic signs. Honestly, you almost had to respect the commitment to catastrophe. If there was a trophy for trying hard and still losing, Oakland would have had that in the bag. Wilmington forgot how to bat. Now, this one's a beauty. The 1884 Wilmington Quicksteps stepped onto the diamond and apparently forgot that baseball involves hitting. They finished with a team batting average of .175. That's not one guy having a bad year, that's the entire team. Imagine an entire office where no one knows how to send an email. That's pretty much what we're talking about. They managed just 91 hits in 521 at-bats. It's like every at-bat was a coin flip, except the coin was rigged. Opposing pitchers must have been happy to face Wilmington. It was basically a stat-heading free-for-all. If you ever wanted to look like a Cy Young winner, just pitch to the quick steps and let the magic happen. Sure, it was a short-lived season. They only played 18 games before folding, but that was long enough to etch their whackness into history. Because when your team average looks like a pitcher's batting line, you know things have gone terribly wrong. Let's just say, Wilmington's offensive strategy might have been swing at air and hope the wind does the rest. Not surprisingly, they never got invited back to the big leagues. Chris Davis, the million-dollar flop. Have you ever seen someone get paid boatloads of money to do absolutely nothing productive? Well, that's Chris Davis. In 2018, Davis was pulling in over $21 million a year from the Baltimore Orioles and delivered one of the worst offensive seasons in MLB history. He hit just .168 over 522 plate appearances. That's not just a bad season, that's a baseball horror movie. Shockingly, his slump wasn't just a few weeks, it lasted the entire year. He struck out 192 times and finished the season with an on-base percentage that could barely get a cab. At one point, Davis went 0 for 54. That's 54 straight plate appearances without a single hit. In fact, he broke a record for the longest hitless streak ever by a position player. Fans started giving him standing ovations just for putting the ball in play. It actually got so bad that Orioles supporters were tweeting sympathy messages. And remember, he wasn't some rookie finding his feet. This was a former 50-home run guy. But in 2018, he couldn't hit a beach ball with a frying pan. Even worse, his contract was for 7 years, totaling $161 million. But considering how poor he was, the Orioles were essentially paying him to air swing professionally.
Bill Bergen, catcher of baseballs, hitter of almost nothing. Bill Bergen is proof that you can be really good at one thing and still be historically awful at another. The man could catch. He had a cannon for an arm and was reportedly a solid defensive presence behind the plate. But when it came to batting, let's just say pitchers didn't exactly lose sleep before facing him. Bergen had a terrible career batting average of 170 over 11 seasons. He had over 3,000 plate appearances and still couldn't bat better than a little leaguer with one eye closed. He also managed to go 0 for 45 at one point. Imagine waking up for weeks, going to work, failing miserably, and still showing up the next day like nothing happened. That was Bergen's life. He holds the lowest batting average ever for any player with over 2,500 at-bats. His bat was so cold, it probably needed a winter coat. And yet, teams kept playing him on defense. It's like hiring someone who can't type for a typing job just because they sit up straight. You can respect Bergen's hustle, but if he ever made solid contact, the ball probably fainted from shock. John Gocknauer, bad hitter, worse fielder. If there was ever a player who did both hitting and fielding equally badly, it was John Gocknauer. For real, this guy was a walking blooper reel. He played just 3 seasons in the early 1900s and somehow managed to mess up both sides of the game. Let's start with the bat. Gocknauer hit 187 across his career, never hit a single home run, and struck out like it was his side hobby. But wait, it gets worse. On defense, the man committed 146 errors in just 264 games. That's like tripping over your own shoelaces every third inning. One season, he racked up 98 errors all by himself. That's nearly 1 per game. Most players would get benched, but nope. Gocknauer stayed in the lineup like a bad punchline. He still holds the record for most at-bats without ever hitting a home run by anyone with a career average under .200. At some point, you'd think someone in the dugout would hand him a different glove, or maybe a prayer. But no, he kept plugging along, bravely swinging and misfielding through history. I'm sure somewhere out there, there's a little league coach using his stats as a deterrent.
John Coleman, the most unlucky pitcher ever. John Coleman had an 1883 season that should be locked in a vault and labeled "Do Not Repeat." Pitchers today cry over a double-digit loss season, but Coleman? He lost 48 games in 1 year.
That number still stands as the most losses by a pitcher in MLB history. But wait, there's more. He also gave up 772 hits and 291 earned runs. Let that sink in. That's more base hits than some teams give up all season. At this point, his defense might have been made of cardboard cutouts. And he wasn't just pitching, he was serving like a human batting tee. And remember, this was in a time when pitchers basically threw complete games every outing. You almost feel bad for him. But then you look at the stat sheet and think, did no one else want to pitch? Maybe his team was just too cheap to hire anyone else. Because Coleman's season wasn't just unlucky, it was legendary in all the wrong ways. His ERA was 4.87, which doesn't sound awful until you realize it came with a side of never-ending pain. Herman Long, the king of oops. Herman Long didn't just make mistakes, he owned them. This man holds the all-time MLB record for most career errors, with a grand total of 1,096. That's over 1,000 defensive blunders. But to be fair, Long played in the 1890s when gloves were basically leather napkins and fields weren't exactly smooth carpets. But still, at some point you've got to wonder if the ball was allergic to him. Despite the fumbles, he had a long and decent career. He could hit a little and steal bases, which probably helped distract from the fireworks show on defense. But when the ball came his way, odds were it wasn't going to end well. Opposing hitters must have loved seeing him out there. It was like a coupon for a freebie. Even today, nobody's touched that error record and nobody wants to. It's the kind of stat you accidentally stumble into during trivia and immediately feel bad about knowing. Herman Long may not have invented the fielding error, but he sure turned it into an art form. So guys, which of these horrific MLB records shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more baseball action.